Hello, this is Stephen Hour, and we are here with a top 10 video. Today, we'll be doing top 10 old school real life gangsters. And because of my fascination with gangsters, I've always wanted to do a video of this. So for this list, I'll be doing old school gangsters. They have to be more of that older generation of gangsters. And these are like my favorites. Now, I'm basing them on not just their impact on the organized crime scene, or just how colorful they are. These are like some of the most colorful gangsters you'll probably see in your lifetime. Now, take into account, I am not glorifying anyone on this list for their criminal exploits. They do not deserve to be glorified. But everyone is always interested and has a fascination with gangsters. So I want to see the actual gangsters that have inspired many great film character portrayals of course, gangsters. But just to do a fun video, and for me, this just sounded something I've always wanted to do, so we're doing it. So without any further ado, let's get in. Before we get into the list, let's kick off with an honorable mention. Honorable mention goes to Vincent Mad Dog Cole, an Irish gangster. Vincent, the nickname says it all for this young hood. Vincent Cole was one of the youngest gangsters in his time, and obviously one of the most psychotic. That's how he earned his nickname, Mad Dog Cole. He had a very troubled childhood growing up, eventually fell into organized crime, and eventually became an enforcer and a hitman for the notorious Dutch Schultz. But because he was so young and a hothead, he demanded to be made equal partner. Dutch turned him down flat, and so Cole formed his own gang with his brother and 3 small-time hoods, and began a gang war with Dutch Schultz to control his criminal activities. He earned the nickname Mad Dog just because of his, well, he was a mad dog, but he mostly earned it when he during a drive-by accidentally gunned down a 5-year-old Michael Van Gally, who tragically died, and as a result, the media labeled him as the Mad Dog Killer. He was, of course, sent to trial for this murder, but beat the rap, and as a result, he was acquitted. But his days were numbered, as he would eventually be gunned down in a phone booth, and he was only 24. I've always was fascinated by this guy, how he was really part of the worst of the worst. He really came from a really bad background, a tragic background, and turned out to be one of the most notorious and brutal gangsters. Interesting fact, he was kind of an enforcer during his later teen years, and he died in his early 20s. He went out, and he lived by the gun, and he died by the gun. That is the same for many of these gangsters. But the reason he's an honorable mention is because really he doesn't have that much of a longevity compared to many others on this list. So yeah, let's get into the top 10. Kicking off at number 10. Albert Anastasia, the Lord High Executioner, former mafia boss and member of Murder Incorporated. Truly the most feared gangster of his generation. Albert Anastasia killed his way to the top of the organized crime scene. He was of course of Sicilian birth. Sicilian, Italian, of that culture. He earned the nickname Lord High Executioner because of him being associated with the notorious Murder for Hire squad, Murder Incorporated, which has some of the most brutal and most infamous members of its time. At one point he was the underboss in what was at the time the Bonano crime family, before the boss mysteriously disappeared and his brother was found dead. He eventually rose up to become the boss of that family, now later to be changed to be called the Anastasia crime family. He also earned a few other nicknames, such as the Mad Hatter because he was crazy, and a bit of gun crazy, I should say, but no one ever used that in his presence. He became essentially one of the bosses of one of the 5 New York crime families. Now, the reason I put him on the list is because he is arguably the most feared member of his time. He was an infamous member of Murder Incorporated and has beat the rap to be sentenced to death not once but twice. But of course, the crime eventually caught up with him, and he was assassinated whilst at a barbershop in the barber's chair. It has one of the most infamous pictures in mob history. And the fact that he is often labeled the most feared, the Cosa Nostra gangster of his generation, has to be acknowledged. So here's at number 10. Coming in at number 9. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, a Jewish gangster, and what many people call the founder of Las Vegas. Bugsy Siegel grew up on the streets of New York City, where he befriended he befriended two of the most infamous names in organized crime history. His best friend, Meyer Lansky, and of course one of the most infamous members in organized crime, Charles Lucky Luciano, operating as an enforcer and hitman, and made a fortune during the days of bootlegging. He eventually rose to be an infamous name. He got the nickname Bugsy because he was nuts. But of course, as he grew up and be more respected and more influential in organized crime scenes, people never used that name in his presence. Eventually, he moved out into Los Angeles, where he essentially muscled in on the rackets there and essentially became a big earner. But wanting to leave behind a legacy, he went to Las Vegas, which was a desert town by that point, but saw a future of like giant casinos, and the fact gambling was legal there. He had so much influence, he managed to get many gangsters to invest in creating the Flamingo Hotel, which was the first proper big casino hotel in Las Vegas. But something you should know about Bugsy, he was a hitman, not a businessman. He in fact was one of the founding, according to reports, he was a member of Murder Incorporated. Others say he was, but was let go. Others say he never was. Despite that, he was an influential member of Murder Incorporated, before sadly they got disbanded for obvious reasons, with most of them ending up in the electric chair. However, Bugsy's story takes a sour turn. Just like the two previous, he also ended up with a gruesome fate. Now, according to rumors, he was apparently skimming money from the mob, or either that or his mistress at the time, Virginia Hill, better known as the mistress or the queen of the mob. As a result, because you never steal money from the mob, he was assassinated. To this day, his murder remains unsolved, but it's commonly believed that the mob was responsible for his death. However, despite the fact he died, what he left behind really changed the world. Las Vegas became one of the biggest tourist destinations, and was also considered one of the greatest money-making opportunities for many mobsters to come to Las Vegas and create these casinos for their operations. So Bugsy left behind, in a way, one of the lasting legacies in American history. He created the modern Las Vegas, and this led, of course, to the creation of the Las Vegas Strip. Coming in at number 8, Dutch Schultz, Jewish gang leader. Dutch Schultz, real name Arthur Flegenheimer, is often referred to as the black sheep of the mob. He took the name Dutch Schultz from a notorious gangster way before his generation as a sign of respect, and he always hated his name Arthur Flegenheimer. He eventually became a notorious bootlegging gang leader during the Prohibition days, up until the 30s when the commission was formed. There was always an uneasy alliance because he was too wild, too gun crazy, and was considered nuts by many gangland standards. He of course got into many turf wars with the previously mentioned Mad Dog Cole and Jack Legs Diamond. Eventually, Thomas E. Dewey, the first ever gangbuster, went after Dutch Schultz twice, once on tax evasion, which he beat the rap, and second for other charges. Realizing there was no other way to get rid of that bribery wasn't going to work on Dewey, which he was shocked that would never happen, he decided there was only one alternative: kill Dewey. The other mobsters on the commission realized this is a bad idea because killing a prominent law enforcement person like him would bring so much heat down, but Dutch didn't care. He was going to do it with or without their consent, which of course the commission always consents to hits like this. As a result, a murder contract was ordered on him. He too was quickly assassinated. But surprisingly, when they did shoot him, he surprisingly still lasted for a few hours before eventually succumbing and had these famous rants. Though the fact he died young, he was a very fascinating character. He got involved in mostly bootlegging during the 20s, but in the 30s he got into one of the most lucrative rackets, the numbers rackets, which are still being used by many gangsters, particularly the Italians, to this day. I've always found this guy one of the most colorful character in mob circles. I also like how he was a rebel and really a rebel to the gangsters. He really did not like the idea of playing by the rules, and of course we know what happened to him. And he's also a clear example of how to really survive in organized crime. The question is not how much money can you get, but can you work with others? Dutch Schultz is a clear example of why you should always work with others, or be willing to work with others. Anyway, coming in at number 7. Number 7 goes to Joe Bonano, founder of the Bonano crime family. Bonano is really, I guess you could really say, he is truly a man of honor. True, he is a gangster, but he believed in a lot of the old Sicilian of loyalty, honor, and respect. He was also one of the youngest guys to run a crime family in his early 20s. Many were in their 30s when the commission was formed. He was also a veteran of the Calamaste Marese War, which was a famous mob war between two old, what are known as Mustache Petes, between Joe the Boss Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. The fact he managed to rise to the top, but also keep his family at a low profile. His family was the most Sicilian, and I find it interesting, while all the other crime families in New York, their name always changed, the Bonano stayed the same. The name stayed the same. Eventually, he did get into some trouble. There was rumors of him essentially plotting to kill other members on the commission, the governing body of organized crime, particularly the La Cosa Nostra in America. And eventually there was some infighting within his own crime family. Eventually, he was forced to, step down, and as a result, the family was kind of going back and forth with leadership. And eventually, the family got kicked off the commission during the 70s and 80s. But in the 90s, it managed to get back on the commission, for what I was told, and with new leadership running, the family was back better than ever. And of course, but however, things don't last forever. Interesting fact, Bonano managed to last all the way up to the 90s, and he's one of the few people where a boss was what the term is called put on the shelf, which is essentially getting kicked out of the family. That never happens. The fact that they could do that to a boss, and he was still so respected. He had an infamous book, A Man of Honor, which Ruben Giuliani, who for those in mob circles knows, was the most famous prosecutor to go after the mob in the 80s, especially during the commission case, was really the catalyst for that. He got a bit of his revenge, and his family was also responsible for starting the, I think it was called the French Connection, which was a famous drug running operation from the Sicilian mainland all the way to America. So he kind of started that. He always said he never got involved in drugs, but I always have felt that he might have, whether it was or not. I've always fascinated about this guy because he was always viewed himself as a man of honor, a man, who believed in the rules and believed in a code. And honestly, in this generation of gangsters, I think that kind of code is really needed more. I'm not saying that gangsters, I'm not saying that people should become gangsters. It should be a great life. It's not. I know how the life ends. It doesn't end well. But the fact that it would be nice if some of that old style code could be brought back, might maybe help some people. And honestly, maybe get rid of some of the wild cards. But hey, that's just me. Not trying to glorify or say people should become gangsters. Just throwing in my 2 cents. Coming in at number 6. Frank Costello, the Prime Minister of the Underworld. Essentially, the real-life Vito Corleone. Frank Costello was a truly gambling king. He got a lot involved with gambling. He too came from a poor background. He too latched his, he was forever associated with Charles Lucky Luciano, Maya Lansky, Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese. I really say he's the real-life Vito Corleone. He believed in a code of honor, a little bit honor. He had more of a businessman style to him. He wanted to have this sort of aristocrat with him. He was also one of the few gangsters that had a lot of politicians and judges in his pocket and really pioneered that more than any other gangster of his time. And he was, of course, at one point the boss of the Luciano crime family, later to be called the Genovese crime family, which is now called that up until still to this day. Eventually, after a failed assassination attempt by a hitman and soon-to-be future boss of the family down the line, Vincent the Chin Gigante, he eventually stepped down and died of old age of retirement. He's still one of the most respected and revered gangsters of his generation and is usually called on for disputes and to essentially sort out any problems. The fact that he was that kind of person to exist in both the upper echelon world and the lower echelon world and really be the pioneer in that is really great. He's also another thing that's really heavily how he influenced Vito Corleone was his voice. He had surgery which had that more of a rasp whisper voice, and you can hear that with Vito Corleone in the Godfather films. This guy is just fascinating. And the fact that he was like a person you could call on for disputes, a guy who, you know, thought business, didn't really like violence, he viewed himself more as a businessman. Those type of gangsters kind of still exist today, but not to the prevalent of what Frank was. He was also the classic old school loyalty. He would never rat out on anyone, and when he was sent to prison, he did his time. He's at number 6. Coming in at number 5. Number 5, Meyer Lansky, the mob's accountant. Another Jewish gangster. This man had so much respect in the criminal underworld. He came from a Jewish family, and he was a mastermind with a brain. He, was able to think things ahead. He was really huge in the gambling scene. He got the mob involved in gambling in Cuba, where they did all their casinos. He, of course, had close ties and association with Lucky Luciano, and he was heavily respected not just within the Luciano family, not just within the other New York crime families, but nationwide. Every time when the commission or the national crime syndicates needed to have a big say that would affect all the families, Meyer Lansky's contributions and voice was always heard and was heavily appreciated. He was an honest criminal, but he was also a criminal who was always about business. He would always listen to reason, and Meyer Lansky, of course, is the big inspiration for the Hyman Roth character in Godfather Part 2. He kept a very low profile. He didn't really personally kill anyone. You had people to kill for him. And according to one person, a handshake from Meyer Lansky is worth more than 50 of the city's toughest wise guys. In fact, he had such a power and influence, he even could prevent or help initiate a made man. That just shows how much respect he can, cultivate. He died, I believe it was, in the 80s of old age. However, when the FBI went through his tax returns, he only had a couple of 100,000, I think it was, but he was believed to have more than that. And they believe it's still hidden in bank accounts. And people are still trying to find it to this day, but they still can't. And that just shows just how much of a mastermind he is. He is truly the last of a dying breed of the more mastermind type gangsters. And also, it's better to keep a low profile than a high profile. Coming in at number 4, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the Godfather of Harlem. Bumpy Johnson was pretty much a notorious gangster that ran most of the Harlem crime scene throughout most of its run. The reason, and of course the nickname Godfather of Harlem, was because for a black gangster to have a bit of influence with the Italian gangsters is truly something special. He started out as a foot soldier enforcer with a female gang leader, Madame St. Clair, and had a name for himself in the numbers racket. He went to war with Dutch Schultz, and it was rumored he made a deal with the commission to control all of Harlem, and of course cut the commission in. In exchange, he runs all of Harlem, all of Harlem's rackets, all his. And the fact that he has that respect and could work with those of the Italians is really something. But I think his biggest contribution has to be now it's unconfirmed, but where he took Frank Lucas under his wing and taught him the ropes. And after his death, I believe it was in the 60s, or maybe it might be 70s, Frank Lucas would rise to become Harlem's big #1 gang leader. And the thing I find interesting is that he is completely different to the black gangsters that followed him. He was not really that flashy. He was more of a tough street guy. The others, like Nicky Barnes or Frank Lucas, were more colorful, were more flashy. Not really with Bumpy. He was definitely of a different breed. So that's why I've always found him very interesting. It may be weird why having this guy at number 4 and really compared to other guys that have more of an influence and more power compared to him, but I've always found him interesting. Also, if I want to watch two really good Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson performances, watch In Hoodlum, and of course the TV show The Godfather of Harlem, which, even though it's factual, it is a really entertaining show. You can watch it on Stan. Give it a watch. Coming in at number 3, Don Carlo Gambino, founder of the Gambino crime family. After Carlo Gambino assassinated, well, Albert Anastasia, he took control of the crime family and ran it through its most prosperous era. The family got involved in everything and became one of New York's most powerful and influential crime families. He is truly a unique gangster. He I think, is one of the greatest examples of a gangster keeping a low profile. He was not flashy, preferred under the radar, and gave the appearance of being a humble man, a humble godfather than an actual mafia don. But he ruled with an iron fist. He is just, and from reports of people who've met him, he was such a nice gentleman. He of course rooted from Naples. He's both intelligent, fierce, and also how he rose to the top, starting from the bottom of the barrel and rose all the way up. That's how gangsters usually are. He managed to command both fear and respect, not within his family, but other families. He had an influence that stretched for a long period of time. Also, unlike other gangsters who either end up dead or in prison, he died of natural causes outside at his home while watching a New York Yankees game. His funeral was attended by many from not just within his family, other crime families, politicians, you name it, to pay their respects to the last great godfather. And even though Frank Costello clearly inspired Vito Corleone, I also like to think Don Carlo also did too. He was truly the last of an old breed, and the fact that he's more under the radar, very under the radar, goes to show just how to really organize in the mob. You have to be more below the radar, not in the eyes of law enforcement. Coming in at number 2, we get into two of the most infamous names in old school mob history. Number 2, Al Scarface Capone, the boss of the Chicago outfit. One of the most infamous names in mob or organized crime. Chicago was known in the Roaring '20s was infamous during the bootlegging days, where gangsters were fighting for control of the illegal, booze trade. The one that would come out of this gang war is Al Scarface Capone, who got the nickname Scarface after having a bar fight down in New York, in Brooklyn, where he received 3 slashes across his face, earning the nickname. He then moved to Chicago, working under Johnny Torrio, where he rose up in the ranks to become the number 2 man, although Johnny Torrio originally killed his own boss. And then when Johnny Torrio left Chicago, he took control of the gang and wiped out all competition. What set him apart from other gangsters of his generation, he was the first celebrity gangster. He had the bronze and brain to run an organization, but he was also very flamboyant. He would always, have his picture taken, tell stories to reporters, go to baseball games and sign autographs. He was, in many ways, the first ever celebrity gangster. And he was also responsible for Chicago's most bloodiest era, with many gangland slayings. Guys like Jaime Weiss, Dion O'Banion. And of course, one of the most infamous gangland slayings in American history. The 1929, on February 14th, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where Al Capone's organization gunned down 5 gangsters, a mechanic, and a doctor in an attempt to assassinate a high-profile mobster of a rival gang. This event helped him win Chicago's gang wars and him to become king of Chicago. And as we all know what happened to Capone. In the early 1930s, he was arrested and charged and convicted for income tax evasion. He was given, I think it was 11 years, but he only served 8 when he was released due to the fact he had he was suffering from for medical reasons. He was suffering from Alzheimer's. He died in the late 40s, and he was, I think, 47, 48 at the time. And despite the fact he died with no power, most of Chicago's big-time gangsters, particularly Tony Accardo, who was the boss of the Chicago outfit and continued essentially to be really its CEO ruler up until I think it was the 90s, came to pay his respects to Capone. He is truly the last of a dying breed. Also, I find interesting, despite he's not really Italian, he's from Naples. But then again, but he was really barred from having any membership within the La Cosa Nostra ranks. Also, the Chicago outfit was very different. Other cities had proper crime families. The Chicago was different. True, they were structured kind of like a crime family, but they also allowed in members that weren't of Italian descent. they allowed in those that were, some were Irish, and most were Jewish. Again, most of the most powerful gangsters during the 20s and 30s were of Jewish descent. Capone is definitely what you think of when you think of old school crime boss gangsters. But I put him at number 2 because I think there's one that truly revolutionized organized crime. And number 1 goes to Charles Lucky Luciano, father of organized crime, chairman of the board. This man really organized crime. Born Salvatore Lucania, Luciano, after the Calcio-Marese War, he organized crime. He created the 5 families of what were the bosses at the time: Luciano, Bonano, Profaci, Mangano, Gagliano, along with other crime families in Buffalo and everywhere, and of course the Chicago outfit. He really organized crime. He was a bit flashy. He got the nickname Lucky after surviving a one-way drive, and people said, boy, you were lucky to come out of that alive. He earned the nickname Lucky. He was also one of the first to really revolutionize the idea of Italians working with others that weren't of Italian descent. In other words, he didn't care about your background, but if we can make money, we can work together. In fact, some of his top guys that he trusted were mostly Jewish, Bugsy and Lansky, who we just mentioned. The fact he organized crime, got it structured to run more like a corporation than an actual gang, is something really special. Of course, he was heavily influenced by the teachings of Arnold Rothstein, who was his mentor and friend. Luciano really transformed organized crime what it is today. The commission still stands to this day because of what he did. He also established certain crimes, like he was convicted, and he was truly just a person who believed in business, and he didn't care. He wanted just to make money. Of course, sadly, things don't end well. Because of his flashy and high profile, and I think it was 1936, somewhere in the 30s, he was convicted for running a large prostitution ring and was given a 50-year sentence. It didn't serve that long because during World War II, with his connection on the docks, I managed to help in the war effort. He was pardoned, but it came at a price of him being deported, where he went back to his home of Sicily, Sicily area. After that, he still tried to rule his crime family despite being exiled, and he died in the I think it was in the early 60s. And his last wish of being brought back to America was granted. He was buried in, I think it was Long Island, Staten Island, somewhere there. And of course, the person who gave the eulogy was, of course, Carlo Gambino, who was considered the next Lucky Luciano. As the time went on, the crime family is now called the Genovese family, but the fact that he really organized crime to what it is today is truly fascinating and something that needs to be honest. In other words, if you really want to know about organized crime, you can't know one detail without looking into the life story of Lucky Luciano, and he's my number 1. There we have it. That was top 10 old school real life gangsters. Did you like the list? Who do you think should have been on? Did I leave anyone out? Who's your favorite number 1? Write down in the comments, and this has been the Steven Hour. Ladies and gentlemen, so long for now. Enjoy the rest of your day.